In the past decade, we've seen more and more extreme weather, with predictions being that it will only get worse.
Hotter days and warmer nights
But
will become
the government
the new
has
normal.
ambitious plans to fight this new
We
threat.
call this the Singapore Green Plan 2030.
And in that plan, electric vehicles play a crucial role. However, concerns and doubts over the effectiveness and credibility of EVs are starting to mount. We ask the big question, are EVs truly the future? Every year, vehicles make up around 15% of our total carbon emissions. That's more than 6.4 million tons of carbon. If we were to try and build a pool 2 meters deep to contain all of that, it would be 2.5 times bigger than Singapore. And with the government's plans to achieve a net zero emission state, it is of little wonder why the government would place so much emphasis on vehicles in their green plan. By 2025, the government aims to cease all new registration of diesel vehicles and to install EV chargers at all HDB car parks. And by 2030, the government plans to have all new car and taxi registrations be of cleaner energy models, along with installing 60,000 EV charging points nationwide. To understand the issue better, we have to first know what's the main difference between our two types of vehicles. An ICE vehicle, or internal combustion engine vehicle, uses either petrol or diesel to generate power within the engine. This process, however, releases many byproducts such as carbon dioxide. An EV, or electric vehicle, runs off of power from a battery, which is charged by the country's electricity grid. In hindsight, the EV sounds much cleaner than an ICE vehicle. However, an article published by MIT in 2022 states that manufacturing an EV can produce 80% more emissions compared to ICE vehicles, primarily from mining the metals used in the battery. It is estimated that producing an EV releases 6 to 12 tons of carbon, which could be higher depending on battery size, such as a Tesla battery, which produces 16 tons of carbon. On the other hand, an ICE vehicle only produces 5 to 8 tons in its production. To find out more, we turn to Walter Teixeira, an associate professor at the Singapore University of Social Sciences and nominated MP.
With electric vehicles, the trade-off is this. Embedded in their higher purchase cost is the fact that they actually do use more resources for manufacturing, particularly for the battery pack. But because electric vehicles are significantly more efficient in actual use, once you use them enough, they are actually more efficient and less environmentally costly than conventional vehicles.
While EVs do not produce local emissions, the energy used to fuel our grid does. So exactly how clean is the Singapore grid?
In terms of Singapore's energy mix today, it's actually about 94% of it comes from natural gas.
This is Dean, the head of Mobility and Sustainable Energy Solutions at SP Power Group. He oversees the installation of EV chargers in Singapore.
There are many plans on foot to kind of change that. So for example, setting up more solar, within Singapore, exploring alternative sources of energy. So in order for a small country like Singapore to meet its energy demands in a sustainable way, it's actually quite difficult. So I think if we all do our part, then it is possible. Transportation still accounts for 15 to 16% of the country's emissions. If let's say by 2035, half of the total vehicle population in Singapore, we are running on electricity or some other form of clean energy, you're moving a needle. Because of the reduction from its current level by replacing it with a cleaner variant.
Singapore's grid, while not yet carbon neutral, would eventually be, as more technological improvements are made to upgrade our energy efficiency and as the government looks into alternative energy sources. But if an EV is overall more eco-friendly as compared to an ICE vehicle, why aren't we seeing more EVs on the road? Every year, car enthusiasts gather here at Wicked Wallet. Here you'll find all sorts of vehicles from sports cars and vintage cars to even forklifts. But not a single EV. But why not?
If the infrastructure and the ecosystem is ready, I will consider.
Electric vehicles is still slow at this moment.
Not at the moment, because in Singapore for charging is not very convenient yet. And the charging is take a lot of time.
It's gas. You can go to a gas station maybe 5 minutes and you go, right? But if you charge, maybe 1 hour.
The response was almost unanimous. Charging is an issue, be it the availability of charging stations or the charging time. But for that, who better to ask than an EV driver himself? This is Dennis Koh. He's been driving a Tesla Model 3 for about 2 years now. As we drove around, we asked him what it was like to drive an EV.
The apartment does not have a charging station, but it's not an issue because there are always charging stations nearby, and it's very easy to locate chargers in Singapore. You go through the app, it tells you all the charging stations which is near you.
So, after driving around for about half an hour, the battery went from 27% to 20%. We then went to a nearby Tesla supercharger, which in the same time frame charged the battery to more than 80%.
This is actually a very common misconception that people who don't own electric vehicles have, is that it is not necessary to charge a modern electric vehicle every single day. In fact, most mass-market electric vehicles sold today have batteries which are large enough for maybe anywhere from half a week to a week of regular driving in Singapore. As an electric vehicle owner, I would actually tell you that there's too much charging and not enough electric vehicles right now.
With that in mind, you won't actually need 600,000 chargers to accommodate 600,000 cars. So the 60,000 charging station goal the government has planned would be able to suffice the current fleet of EVs. So to answer the question of whether EVs are truly the future, the answer is a little more complicated than a yes or no. We can't just look at EVs as a magic pill, but more of a piece of a much bigger puzzle. But could there be an alternative? That would be Varick, a representative from the Singapore Youth for Climate Action, a non-profit organization centered around engaging youths in volunteer work to aid environmental efforts. He also has a channel called Tesiudai, where he recently posted a video exploring the prospects of a car like Singapore. Because in Singapore, despite the limited land, 12% of it is taken up by roads, and of that 12%, nearly 1 million vehicles share it, and of that million, 600,000 are privately owned, which is a lot. However,
for what I see, a majority of people, it's not the car that they really want, it's the need of mobility. So if we satisfy the need of mobility with public transport, then I feel that we can have fewer cars on the road.
But if the government seeks to promote public transport and improve other modes of travel such as cycling,
that would mean that when we design roads, we'll be looking at how many people we can move instead of how many vehicles can we move. If there's a bus coming through, it should get priorities because it's carrying 100 people along it. But I feel like this should be a push to make public transport better or even faster than driving.
In fact, Tengah New Town will be home to Singapore's first car-free town centre. The layout of the town would allow for movement via walking or cycling to be much more efficient, and something that could lead to a new way of town planning in Singapore.
I think at a town level, when people are doing like intra-town commutes, let's say from their residential area to buy groceries and things, it just doesn't make sense to move one person and a few of your NTUC shopping bags with 2 tons of metal. It just doesn't make any sense. Whereas if we have like other modes of travel, it's actually much more efficient to do it. Like, I mean, the simplest example is you take a bicycle. The bicycle weighs 15 kilos and you can lug all the things, including yourself.
And Varick makes a good point, that if our transportation system were to improve to a point where driving becomes less of a need and more of a want, car ownership would see a drastic decrease, thus reducing carbon emissions. So, which is better? A car-like future or an EV future?
Well, I think the answer is we have to do everything at once. We have to try as far as possible to encourage people to use public transport, or even better, to not travel so much at all, right? So you can talk about your work from home, shopping and playing near where you live rather than going halfway across the island to do these things. So when I say all at once, that's because we again have to recognize that there are many Singaporeans whose needs will not be met by public transport or cannot be met in the nearby vicinity to their homes. And that's where electrification of private transport basically comes in.
To sum it all up, EVs are only the future if we decide for them to be today. The government has ambitious plans for the future, but we have to start now rather than later. While the government will continue to encourage and push for EVs to become mainstream and replace ICE vehicles, at the end of the day, cars generate only 15% of Singapore's total pollution. And as citizens of the Earth, we should take care of our planet. That other 85% isn't exclusive. Nothing in this world works alone. So other than your choice of transport or your type of car, think of what you throw, what you buy, and how you live. Because at the end of the day, there is no planet B.